Okay, continuing on with the 12.2 segment, types of respiration. Under types of respiration, the first type of respiration that we have to talk about is the very commonly known aerobic form of respiration. So under that, we're going to talk about aerobic respiration. Okay, we'll start off with the equation that we have known since basically kindergarten, right? Glucose C6H12O6 combining with oxygen to produce carbon dioxide and water. Dioxide and water. Simple, straightforward. One problem, it's not balanced. So 6 there, 6 to 6 carbons, and 6 H2O, like so. That is the equation. Now, whenever we talk about aerobic or anaerobic respiration, we have to have the capability of assigning a formal definition to each of these processes. If at any point of this series you see this DEF surrounded by a bracket, know that it is a formal definition. That's what I like to call a formal definition. And you have to memorize that as it is word for word. That's the idea. Okay, how would you define aerobic respiration? I would start off like aerobic respiration is the hydrolysis. What does hydrolysis mean? That means breakdown. Is the hydrolysis of a respiratory substrate. Now you can strictly say glucose, but that's not that accurate because if we take a look at the previous spread, we can actually see that we can use almost anything, not just a carbohydrate, not just glucose. We can use lipid, we can use proteins, and yes, there are other sources. Those are more complicated, so that is not inclusive in your syllabus. So the hydrolysis of a respiratory substrate, what's the end goal? To release energy in the form of, remember, whenever we're talking about energy, we have to say that we are releasing energy in the form of ATP. This is perhaps the most important part of the definition, but it's the smallest. Using oxygen. Using oxygen. This is what denotes the entire aerobic part of this definition. So if you do have a keen, sharp mind, you will understand that when we are defining anaerobic respiration, we'll have the same exact definition, but we'll say without using oxygen. Without using oxygen. Simple, right? Just as a net idea, just as a rough idea, I can tell you that aerobic respiration is capable of producing up to 38 molecules of ATP. And believe me, that's a lot. Not that much, but it's a significant amount of ATP compared to all the metabolic processes that can otherwise utilize or produce ATP as they wish. That's aerobic respiration. Moving on to the second one, and this is the more detailed form of respiration under this topic. I mean, not really. The aerobic part is the most detailed one. We'll talk about that, all the processes in detail. But in this 12.2 spread, this has the most detail. Anaerobic respiration. Let me write that down. Okay. Anaerobic respiration. Definition. It's the same exact definition, so I'm not going to waste either of our times. Bring it over here. Bring this. Align it. Okay. Right. Hydrolysis of a respiratory substrate to release energy in the form of ATP. Leave a space. And you have to be very specific to say that we are not using oxygen. We're not using oxygen. And what happens when you don't really use oxygen? There's a maximal production of just 2 ATP. Sometimes not even 2. That's the thing. Aerobic respiration can produce a significantly more amount of ATP when we compare that with anaerobic respiration. That's the idea. Okay, let's close off the aerobic segment. Now we're going to focus on the anaerobic segment a little bit more. We assigned a formal definition. Do memorize it. Now we're going to talk about the different forms of anaerobic respiration. Number one, that can occur in yeast. You know yeast, right? Your typical fungi yeast. And then we will talk about the type of anaerobic respiration occurring inside ourselves. So I'll call us mammals. It would be fair to call us animals, same thing, but we'll stick to standard scientific definitions. So we'll start with yeast. Now here's the deal. I'm going to introduce a molecule that you have no idea of, but you will have a major idea of when we talk about the stages of cellular respiration. So stick with me for now. I'm going to draw a 1, 2, 3 carbon molecule like this. A certain circle would represent a carbon atom. Okay. Now this is a molecule known as pyruvate. Molecule known as pyruvate. Okay. Even in mammals, we're starting our anaerobic respiration process using the same molecule. You'll see why this molecule is used, where it comes from, what is the ultimate fate of pyruvate. All those things will be discussed. For now, all you have to know is in both yeast and mammals, the initial substrate is actually pyruvate. Is pyruvate. Right. Let's focus on yeast. Now, the first step in yeast would be to convert this pyruvate into a 2-carbon compound known as ethanol. That's A. Don't confuse that with ethanol. This is ethanol and aldehyde. This is ethanol and aldehyde. Now, do you see we're going from 3 carbons to 2 carbons? How can that possibly be? That can only indicate that a carbon has been lost in the form of carbon dioxide. This is a process known as decarboxylation. We will talk about that in more detail later. But simply, a carbon dioxide is being lost, pyruvate is being converted to ethanol. Then the final step occurs. This is a 2-step process. The final step would be still we do have 2 carbons. Now we have the final product, ethanol. Ethanol to ethanol. That is the final product and alcohol. Now this process is actually catalyzed by an enzyme known as alcohol dehydrogenase. Alcohol dehydrogenase, known as alcohol dehydrogenase. That's the enzyme, and simply speaking, this process is commonly referred to as ethanol fermentation. That's an O. Ethanol fermentation. You've heard of fermentation, right? It's the exact same process. The only thing is, up until this point, we have known that it was just a 1-step process where glucose was converted to ethanol. But here we actually learn that it's this pyruvate thing. Now, to roughly simply give you an idea, it's like this. Now, glucose is a 6-carbon molecule, so 3, 4, 5, 6. Pyruvate is simply glucose split into 2. Keep that idea in your mind. That's the only thing you want to know about pyruvate for now. So recap, pyruvate to ethanol, catalyzed by something known as alcohol dehydrogenase. What about mammals? Do mammals also have a 2-step process? Do mammals also have alcohol dehydrogenase? Nope, not really. It's a very simple 1-step process when it comes to mammals. When it comes to mammals, we get something known as lactate or lactic acid. Lactate or lactic acid, and this is done by the word jumped from my mouth previously. This is done by an enzyme known as lactate dehydrogenase. Let's try and create a small link. Do you see? Lactate dehydrogenase. But what about ethanol alcohol dehydrogenase? Is alcohol and ethanol the same thing? I mean, basically, yes. You can say ethanol dehydrogenase, that would be also fine. That is also applicable like so. So lactate dehydrogenase converts the pyruvate to lactate and thus producing energy. And something interesting you should notice here is that when it comes to this yeast, we have a carbon dioxide molecule being produced. But do you see here, there's no carbon dioxide. Pyruvate is already a 3 carbon molecule, lactate is also a 3 carbon molecule. There's no carbon dioxide, but that's a very tricky point that examiners love to use to trick you. And final point, this is known as lactate fermentation. Lactate fermentation. I'm too lazy to write fermentation properly. Lactate fermentation. Now this lactate has different fates. This can be oxidized to pyruvate to enter the Krebs cycle, or this can actually be stored as glycogen. More on that later after we have understood about the stages of cellular respiration. Okay, moving on to an interesting part of this topic. Now we'll be talking about the adaptations of rice. Let's see, looks like a soon to be E. Sorry. Okay. Adaptations of rice, I call them rice plants, to grow submerged in water. Okay. What are we talking about? Why is this a big deal? And what is going on? Now, whenever we take a typical plant, absolutely it requires water. That's a no-brainer. But what happens with too much water? What if you submerge that particular plant in water? It would die off, right? The plant is going to die. It's very simple. It will die off. But something interesting you can find with rice is that rice plants are actually adapted to grow submerged in water. They can be submerged in water without any issue. These features of rice plants are typically asked as a question, and that question can actually go up to 6 marks. So, for example, explain, describe, and outline the adaptations of rice to grow submerged in water. And whenever students who have no idea about this see these 6 marks, they freak out. I mean, obviously, right? If you have no idea what this is, you're going to lose all 6 marks. It's very tolerable to be panicking about that. But I'm going to give you the exact required points for you to obtain any number of marks no matter what. If it's a 3-mark question, if it's a 5-mark question, if it's a 6-mark question. I mean, it won't really go up to 8 marks. I have not seen it go up to 8 marks at any given point any year. The maximum number of marks I have seen for this question is actually 6. I think that was 2023 October, November, or 2023 May, June. I'm not entirely sure, but it was maximum 6 marks, right? I'm going to give you 3 points, hence 3 adaptations that rice plants have to grow submerged in water. Number 1, the first adaptation. Their stems really grow fast. So faster growth of stem to reach for air above water. So when they are submerged, they can grow really fast to reach for air above water. They can grow really high. That's the thing. Very quickly too. That's the point. Faster growth of stems. Number 2, this is an interesting word. They have something known as Aerenchima. I'll do my best to write clearly without rushing. Aerenchima tissue. Now, if you know how to associate biology words, you see this aren kind of sounds like air almost, and you would not be wrong. Yes, it does deal with air. What exactly are or is aerenchyma tissue? Aerenchyma tissue is simply air spaces. Air spaces for specific gases. Air spaces for specific gases. Now I can explain with 1,000 words how it happens and what it happens and what the enzyme tissue does. But as we all know, a picture speaks 1,000 words. And there you go. That's aerenchyma tissue. Do you see? Now this is a rice plant cut like this. Okay, it's basically cut like this. So if we were to actually observe this, you see, so if it was cut like this, so it was kept cut like this, if you get the perspective warp properly. Now you cut it, and now we're looking at it from the top. When we are doing so, do you see, we have these spaces, these air spaces. See, these are empty spaces, nothing's inside. Those are actually aerenchyma tissue. Aerenchyma tissue. You see, those are air spaces. So to give you a better, even better idea, see, this is the idea. Not just rice plants, many other plants also have aerenchyma tissue. We will not be talking about any of those things, but you see, here we have these air spaces. Basically, these air spaces. All those air spaces do is they simply harbor gases for gaseous exchange and hence photosynthesis. Airspace for gases. Airspace is for gases. Simple. Now the third point is a rather interesting one. So to denote the interesting points, I typically use new colors. Okay, I'll pick green. Okay. The third one is actually that it's a long deal. Now imagine if oxygen is lacking. If oxygen is actually lacking, that means actually we cannot carry out aerobic respiration. So to produce energy, of course, they need energy. To produce energy, they resort to anaerobic pathways. They resort to anaerobic pathways. That's what they do. Now, what happens when anaerobic respiration takes place in plants? Anaerobic respiration will produce ethanol. So, since it will not produce lactate. Plants are not animals. Plants are not mammals, okay? Since ethanol is produced, they have actually adapted. Rice plants have actually adapted to tolerate high amounts, to tolerate high amounts of ethanol. Not every plant can tolerate that much ethanol. They can tolerate a lot of ethanol, and they have the enzyme ethanol dehydrogenase, ethanol dehydrogenase, which breaks this ethanol down. Oh my god, my handwriting is a mess. Which breaks down this produced ethanol. So that's why they have this tolerance. That's why they have this much of a tolerance. They're capable of breaking this ethanol down. So just a slight recap. Adaptations of rice, faster growth of stems, parenchyma tissue is present, and then if oxygen is lacking at any given point, they can resort to anaerobic pathways. Now, ethanol is problematic, so what's the solution for that? They have adapted to tolerate high amounts of ethanol. Why? What is one factor? One factor would be having this ethanol dehydrogenase enzyme at a greater supply that can nicely break down the ethanol. That is the final spread for 12.2 types of respiration. The next part would be the hardest part of this entire chapter. Not the hardest, but the trickiest. That would be 12.3. We're going to talk about aerobic respiration and its specific stages.